There's a kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It is the silence that creeps in when everything around you should make sense, but doesn't. You have what you thought you wanted, and still, something inside feels empty. That emptiness, that quiet ache in the soul, is where Viktor Frankl's story begins. In the 20th century, as the world was drowning in war and chaos, one man began to ask a question most people were too afraid to face. What gives life meaning? Not pleasure, not comfort, not success, but meaning. Because when everything else is stripped away, when you lose the people you love, the freedom you cherish, the dreams you built, what keeps you alive? Frankl's answer didn't come from a library or a classroom. It came from hell, a place where the human soul was tested beyond imagination. The Nazi concentration camps. Before the camps, Frankl was a psychiatrist, a thinker, a man who believed the human spirit was capable of overcoming anything. But when the world collapsed around him, when his family was taken, when every comfort was gone, his philosophy was no longer an idea. It was survival. He wrote later, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." It became one of the most powerful sentences in human history. Because Frankl realized that meaning is not a luxury, it's oxygen. Without it, the soul begins to die, even if the body keeps living. Imagine this. You wake up every day, go through the motions, scroll through your phone, chase approval, money, pleasure, but deep down there's that whisper. Is this it? That's not depression. That's disconnection. It's the same emptiness Frankl saw everywhere after the war. People surrounded by comfort, yet starving for purpose. He called it the existential vacuum, a kind of inner hunger, not for food or love, but for why. Frankl believed that this hunger is what makes us truly human. Animals seek survival. Humans seek significance. We don't just want to live. We want to live for something. And when that something is missing, we begin to wither. We distract ourselves. We drown in noise, pleasure, achievement. We chase everything except what truly matters. Because facing that emptiness is terrifying. But Frankl faced it. He was forced to. Inside the camps, stripped of everything, he saw what remains when there's nothing left to lose. He saw men who gave up, their eyes hollow, their will gone, dying days after they lost hope. And he saw others, starving, beaten, humiliated, still whispering prayers, still comforting others, still finding reasons to live one more day. What was the difference? It wasn't strength. It wasn't luck. It was meaning. Those who had something to live for, a person, a dream, a purpose beyond the pain, could survive the unbearable. Frankl wrote that even in the camps, the smallest reason could keep a man alive. One prisoner dreamed of seeing his wife again. Another wanted to finish a manuscript. Some simply wanted to bear witness, to survive, so the world would one day know the truth. Meaning became their armor. It didn't take away the suffering, but it transformed it. Suffering with no meaning destroys, but suffering with meaning redeems. That was Frankl's revelation. You cannot always control what happens to you, but you can always control what it means. He saw it again and again. Men with every reason to give up who chose instead to rise, to find light even in hell. And that's when Frankl understood. The human spirit is not broken by suffering. It is broken by meaninglessness. We think we need happiness to live. But happiness is fragile. It depends on what happens. Meaning, on the other hand, endures anything. You can take away a man's freedom, his comfort, even his future. But if he believes his life still matters, he can endure the impossible. That's why Frankl said, "Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose." Let that sink in. It's not your pain that kills you. It's the belief that it has no purpose. And maybe you've felt that before. Those nights when you ask yourself why you're even trying. When life feels like a loop of endless effort with no direction. When every success feels empty and every failure feels final. Frankl would say that emptiness is not your enemy, it's your invitation. The void is where meaning begins. He believed that every person is called to find their own purpose, not by avoiding pain, but by facing it. He didn't see suffering as something to escape, but as something to understand. Because hidden inside your suffering is a clue, a direction pointing to what matters most to you. The pain reveals your values. It shows you what you care about, what you're willing to endure, what you would live or even die for. That's where meaning lives. Not in comfort, but in commitment. Not in pleasure, but in purpose. Not in having less pain, but in having a reason to carry it. So as you listen to this story, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what is my why? What would I endure anything for? Who or what would make it worth it to keep going, even when everything falls apart? That's the question Frankl wanted every human to ask, because in answering it, you begin to discover your true freedom. The greatest tragedy is not to suffer, but to suffer for nothing. Find your why, and you will find your life. There's a moment in every life, a point when pain becomes too heavy, when everything feels meaningless, and you begin to whisper, I can't do this anymore. Viktor Frankl stood in that place, cold, starved, forgotten. He saw men crumble beside him every single day, and yet he noticed something extraordinary. Some people somehow still chose to live. What made them different? What kept their spirit alive when every reason to hope was gone? It wasn't strength, it wasn't luck, it was purpose. A why so powerful, it gave them the strength to bear any how. Frankl wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." At first it sounds poetic, but for him, it was a law of survival. He saw that when people lost their purpose, they lost their will to live. But when they found meaning, even in the smallest thing, they could endure the unendurable. One prisoner told Frankl, I must stay alive to see my child again. Another whispered, I want to finish my work, my book. A third said, I must survive so I can tell the world what happened here. Their bodies were weak, but their purpose made them powerful. And when Frankl realized this, he understood that the human spirit is not fueled by comfort, it's fueled by meaning. We live in a time of endless distractions. Comfort surrounds us, yet anxiety, depression, and emptiness are everywhere. Because the human heart doesn't just want pleasure, it wants purpose. Pleasure fades, purpose endures. That's what Frankl called the will to meaning. The deepest human drive, stronger than the will for power, stronger even than the will for pleasure. He believed that every one of us is born with a longing to find something worth suffering for. Think about it. The moments that changed you most, were they easy? Or did they demand everything you had? Maybe it was a dream you refused to give up. Maybe it was someone you loved, someone you protected, someone who gave your pain a purpose. That's what Frankl saw. The moment suffering is connected to purpose, it transforms. It's no longer meaningless pain, it's sacred endurance. He called this tragic optimism, the ability to remain hopeful and find meaning even in tragedy, even in suffering, even in death. He didn't mean blind positivity. He meant something much deeper, that even in the worst circumstances, life still holds potential for meaning, and therefore, for hope. He saw this truth reflected everywhere. A mother who loses her child but dedicates her life to helping other mothers heal. A man who survives cancer and uses his story to give others courage. A woman who forgives her abuser and teaches compassion instead of hate. That's what Frankl meant when he said, in some way, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. The pain doesn't disappear, but it becomes bearable. It becomes transformative. Now imagine you're walking through your own darkness. Maybe you've lost something you loved. Maybe you're stuck in a life that doesn't inspire you anymore. Maybe you've forgotten why you started it all. What Frankl would tell you is this: the why is still there. It never leaves. You just have to remember it. He would ask, what lights you up? Who do you love? What injustice breaks your heart so much that you must do something about it? Because your pain is not random. It's pointing to your purpose. Purpose doesn't mean having everything figured out. It doesn't always look grand or heroic. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, I will love despite my pain. I will create despite my fear. I will give even when I have nothing left. That's what purpose looks like in real life. Not perfection, but perseverance. It's a quiet, steady voice that says, I will not give up. There is meaning in this. Frankl's discovery was revolutionary because it gave people hope. Not false hope, but anchored hope. He wasn't saying, be happy. He was saying, be meaningful. Because happiness is a byproduct of purpose, not the other way around. When you have meaning, you can face pain. You can face uncertainty. You can face life and still stand tall. He told his patients after the war, don't aim at success. The more you aim at it, the more you'll miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue, and it only does so as the unintended side effect of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself. Purpose isn't something you chase. It's something you serve. When you stop asking, what do I want from life, and start asking, what does life want from me, you begin to live differently. That was Frankl's message. Life is not just about what we take. It's about what we give, what we stand for. He said the secret to life is not avoiding suffering, but finding something worth suffering for. That's when pain becomes power. That's when chaos becomes clarity. That's when existence becomes meaningful. So pause here and think deeply. What is your why? Who or what could you dedicate your pain to? What would make even the hardest days worth living? Because that's where your transformation begins. That's where your purpose awakens. Cinematic closing line. The question is not whether you will suffer. The question is whether your suffering will have meaning. Find your purpose, and you will find your power. There's a truth most people never realize. Your pain is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of your transformation. The same fire that burns you can forge you. Viktor Frankl saw this not in theory, but in the deepest darkness a human could experience. In Auschwitz, surrounded by starvation, disease, and death, he discovered something almost impossible, that the human spirit, when faced with unimaginable pain, can rise higher than ever before. He began to see that pain, by itself, is neutral. It's not the suffering that destroys us. It's the meaning we attach to it. If we believe our suffering is pointless, it becomes unbearable. But if we give it purpose, if we see it as a path, it becomes transformative. Frankl once said, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. That's the essence of transformation, when life leaves you no choice but to evolve. It's what happens when the external world collapses and you're forced to rebuild the inner one. Inside the camps, Frankl lost everything: his family, his freedom, his past, his future. But he refused to lose himself. He made a choice, one that no one could take from him, to find meaning in the suffering itself. He asked, what does life expect from me now? That question changed everything. Because instead of asking, why is this happening to me? He began to ask, how can I respond to this with purpose? He noticed something profound. The people who found meaning in their pain were no longer its prisoners. Their bodies were trapped, but their spirits were free. One man comforted others. Another risked his life to save a friend. Frankl himself began imagining lectures he'd one day give about the psychology of suffering. He said, I forced my thoughts to turn to another subject. Suddenly I saw myself standing on the platform of a well-lit lecture room. I was giving a lecture on the psychology of the concentration camp. That imagination, that vision of purpose, kept him alive. Because meaning gives pain direction. It turns despair into determination. It turns helplessness into hope. Think about that in your own life. You can't always escape your suffering, the heartbreak, the loss, the failure, the loneliness. But you can always ask, what can this teach me? What strength is this pain trying to build in me? That question alone transforms everything. Because pain, when seen consciously, stops being your enemy. It becomes your teacher. It's like coal under pressure. In darkness, it seems destroyed. But over time, that same pressure creates a diamond. Your suffering works the same way. It compresses you. It challenges you. It strips away your illusions until only your essence remains. And in that essence, you find your real strength. Frankl realized that transformation begins when you stop trying to escape pain and instead choose to meet it with meaning. He called this process spiritual freedom. Even in the camps, he said, humans still had one final freedom, to choose their attitude, to choose how they would respond. That's the freedom no one can steal. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, he wrote. The last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That was Frankl's rebellion. And it can be yours too. Because pain will visit all of us. But whether it breaks you or builds you depends on your response. It's not the darkness that defines you. It's what you become in that darkness. You can let pain make you bitter, or you can let it make you awake. You can let loss close your heart, or you can let it open your compassion. You can let fear control you, or you can use it as fuel to live more deeply. Frankl used to say that meaning isn't found in comfort. It's found in responsibility. Responsibility to life, to others, to something greater than yourself. When you stop asking life for what it can give you and start asking what it expects from you, your suffering transforms into service. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of life and become a participant in it. That's where real power comes from. Not from control, but from surrendering to meaning. Let's be honest. Pain will never feel beautiful when you're inside it. Transformation rarely does. But years later, when you look back, you'll realize that your darkest moments were also your most defining. They didn't destroy you. They refined you. They burned away what was false, so the real you could finally emerge. Frankl's suffering gave birth to logotherapy, a new school of psychology centered on meaning. He didn't just survive. He transformed his pain into a philosophy that has healed millions. That's the proof. When you give meaning to your suffering, it stops being chaos and becomes contribution. You see, pain only has power over you as long as you resist it. The moment you face it, you reclaim your strength. Because in facing it, you declare, "You cannot define me. I will define what this means." That is the alchemy of the human spirit. That is turning pain into power. Cinematic closing line. The fire that tried to destroy you was never your enemy. It was your awakening. Because pain doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you've always been. There comes a point in every life when survival is no longer enough, when comfort feels empty and pleasure stops satisfying the soul. That's when the deeper question arises. What am I living for? This is where Viktor Frankl's philosophy reaches its highest point. Because to him, meaning wasn't just about enduring suffering. It was about transcending it. It was about finding something so profound, so sacred, that you would live, and even die, for it. In the concentration camp, surrounded by death, Frankl discovered a paradox. Those who lived longest were not the strongest, but the ones who had a reason to survive. A loved one waiting, a book unfinished, a purpose yet fulfilled. They had something greater than pain. They had meaning. And meaning, he realized, was stronger than despair. He said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." That why, that burning purpose, was the invisible force keeping people alive. Imagine that for a moment. Two men face the same horror. Both lose everything, but one sees only suffering, the other sees a mission. The first crumbles, the second endures, not because his pain was less, but because his purpose was more. That's the secret Frankl uncovered. You can survive almost anything if you have something worth surviving for. But this truth doesn't just belong to the past. Today, we face a different kind of suffering. Not starvation, but emptiness. Not despair from pain, but despair from meaninglessness. We have everything, and yet we feel nothing. We live surrounded by distraction, yet haunted by the quiet question, "Why am I here?" And that's where Frankl's voice echoes like thunder through time. The greatest task for any person, he said, is to find the meaning of his life, not in success or happiness, but in responsibility. Because meaning isn't given, it's chosen. It's discovered through commitment, through devotion to something beyond yourself. Frankl believed that ultimate meaning, was not about the pursuit of pleasure or power. It was about self-transcendence, to live for something greater than you. That could be love, it could be art, it could be service, it could be faith. Whatever it is, it must pull you out of yourself and make you answer to something higher. Because when you dedicate yourself to something beyond your ego, suffering loses its sting. Pain still hurts, but it no longer destroys, because you suffer for something. Frankl saw this vividly in one of the most haunting moments of his life. A fellow prisoner, near death, whispered to him, "My wife is gone. My children are gone. There is nothing left to expect from life." Frankl looked at him and said softly, "Then perhaps it is life that expects something from you." That realization changed the man's face. For the first time in months, he had tears, not of despair, but of awakening. He understood. Even in the face of death, he could still respond. He could still be human. And that is the essence of Frankl's philosophy. Meaning is not found in what you get from life, but in what you give to it. That's the ultimate transformation. When you stop chasing happiness and start serving purpose. Because happiness is fragile. It comes and goes. But meaning endures through pain, through loss, through time. When you have something to live and die for, your life gains depth, your suffering gains dignity, and your death gains peace. Frankl didn't just talk about meaning, he lived it until his last breath. He went back to Vienna, wrote his book, Man's Search for Meaning, and spent the rest of his life teaching others how to find their why. He healed not by erasing pain, but by transforming it into wisdom. He proved that even in the ashes of suffering, you can build something sacred, a purpose that no tragedy can destroy. So ask yourself, what would make your life worth the suffering? What idea, what love, what dream is so meaningful that you'd endure anything to fulfill it? Because that is your reason. That is your Viktor Frankl moment. And once you discover it, you'll never be truly lost again. Even in the darkest night, you'll carry a light within you, a reason that pain cannot extinguish. It did not really matter what we expected from life, Frankl said, but rather what life expected from us. Life expects something from you, a contribution only you can make, a meaning only you can live. The question is, will you answer that call? Cinematic closing line. In the end, the purpose of life is not to escape suffering, but to give it meaning, to stand for something so deeply that even pain becomes sacred. Because when you find something to live and die for, you are finally, truly alive.